enjoyed it. I don't know how to put into words how much I've enjoyed each and every one of you expound on this important issue. You all seem to have one thing in common that I drew from the discussion. It's the issue of how the South, Alabama, Louisiana, the gentleman touched on that earlier. Do you find that having the first African-American president makes it more easier for you all to do your work in the country, considering that you do have a Republican Party, many of whom have challenged the Civil Rights Act, challenged the Voting Rights Act in many states across this country? I hope that wasn't too.
I also just want to note that we weren't trying to set a certain mood, but yeah, the lighting system is apparently automatically gone off, so we're going to be remedying that in a second. Please continue.
In other words, is your job more challenging now, or are you fighting for relevancy against these same political forces that Lincoln fought with during that time?
Well, it's as a history person, usually you find yourself fighting with publishers or students who want a grade change. Historians are not known for being people who carry big sticks and look for walls. So I don't know how much difficulty one experiences. I mean, there's difficulties in various ways. For instance, one difficulty that I experienced comes from some voices who denounce Lincoln and say, well, why didn't he free the slaves earlier? Oh, he was half-hearted about it. There was no zing proclamation, therefore his heart wasn't in it. And these are folks I have to confront and say, wait a minute, you've got to understand everything. You've got to understand all the machinery in the watch. Just don't say that's not keeping time. Understand the machinery in the watch. So that's one source. Another source of difficulty I have comes from kind of unreconstructed Confederates. Curiously, just to show you that this is not always a laughing matter, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal back in September on the Emancipation Proclamation, and actually got a death threat posted on a Southern neo-Confederate website. And I, of course, looked at it and said, just let them try. But my college, of course, had to perform all kinds of liability contortions, and the Pennsylvania State Police, of course, monitored this kind of thing. And we had and so it was really kind of strange. To me, it was a little funny. But I'm sure that to other people, it was not funny at all. And the very fact that someone puts a death threat up there to this Yankee, I don't know, I guess I felt kind of complimented. But, I kept thinking, hey, we dished you people up 150 years ago here at Gettysburg. Come on back for some more. So that's what the devil of temptation wants me to say. And so I didn't say that. I did not say that. But yeah, there are challenges. There are challenges of all different sorts today. But I can't really say that they follow any single pattern. They tend to come very episodically. I don't see a connecting thread to them all.
I would say that, I don't know if it's harder or more difficult, the conversations that have emerged with Obama as president have been interesting. And for me, it's been the most interesting conversation about the concept of a post-racial society. Because this idea that somehow we've come to a world where race doesn't matter nearly as much. And I think that is an interesting and important conversation to have, and I think it's one that people need to understand better. And I think as a historian, it is important to give people background and give them a foundation on this whole issue of race coming out of the Civil War, coming out of post-Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. So they recognize the different forms that these issues can take, and how they may not be obvious, but they're still an important part of the society that people have to be able to recognize and distinguish and be prepared for. So I don't know if and in some ways that it's made that conversation less direct and a more complicated conversation, but I think an important one for, I think, our next generation to understand. Because they'll hear this, it's gone away, racism isn't important anymore, but those of us who are a little bit older see things going on that say that it's still there, and you need to be aware of this, because you may become a victim of it unexpectedly. And you need to be prepared for this. You need to see the signs so that you're not lost. I have a colleague who's done a lot of writing about on the West Coast, about African Americans on the West Coast. He came up with a wonderful term that I think I keep talking to my students about. It's a term he said that most people of color develop a sense of travel craft. And what he means by that is that when you go into a new circumstance, you're scoping things out. And you're trying to figure out what is the circumstance, what is the condition, what is the environment, how do I navigate this so I don't wind up doing in the middle of something I didn't expect. And what I worry about in this conversation of a post-racial society is that our students will not develop a sense of travel craft. And they'll go cruising into places where in fact troubles are brewing and they don't see it coming. So I think that for me is the complication that has emerged most importantly, very important in this era of Obama as president.
Thank you.
I think specific to the slavery work, I think that there's an element that is continued and building upon the commitment that we saw from President Bush, but there is perhaps a different feel. I think that one of the things that a lot of people were struck with the President's big speech at the Clinton Global Initiative in September was the unhesitating nature of his description of what we're seeing now as being slavery and being something that we have to deal with. What I saw, interestingly enough, when I started in the Civil Rights Division, we had something called the Involuntary Servitude and Slavery Program. It dated back to the 1930s. It had been called the Peonage Program at one point because that was the lead federal charge, but had been renamed as Involuntary Servitude and Slavery because that's actually what the 13th Amendment prohibits. Well-meaning folks in the Bush administration were afraid that, and I'm not sure who they thought that was going to jump out and point at them, but somehow that black folks would be offended by something called the Involuntary Servitude and Slavery Program at the Civil Rights Division's criminal section. And so they renamed it the Human Trafficking Program. So we end up talking about human trafficking now over the last decade or so as a euphemism for the anti-slavery work. Even within the Obama administration, it took some time for people to get used to some of these things as they were coming in. Those of us who'd worked on it in the Clinton administration and had worked on it over the last 10 years, I don't think needed that ramping up. But new folks came in, often well-meaning white folks who were very nervous about using the word slavery. I do think that the fact that Barack Obama, standing at a podium, says this is slavery, allows people to now once again confront that this is slavery. Douglas always talked about the notion of the euphemisms behind which America would hide, whether we're calling people servants, whether we're calling it a peculiar institution, any of those other things. Anything to avoid having to stare slavery in directly in the face. People are more comfortable talking about rape as a weapon of war and gender-based violence than they are talking about slavery in the Congo. And when you're in a situation where it's more comfortable to use the word rape than it is to use the word slavery, it shows how emotive that is. I think the fact of him going out in public and using this word, for those people who are hesitant, it gives permission. And I think that's actually going to make a big difference going forward.
Thank you. So